Hello and welcome to this videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, I've been asked by many people to say something about what's become known as Pizzagate. This has been, of course, all over the web for weeks, and it breaks down in two basic polarities. There's the mainstream media, sits back in amazement, that has trashed the whole thing, and every detail has been dismissed. Every possibility has been dismissed. But that's what you expect, really. But on the other hand, you've got people who are convinced that every detail of the allegations about Pizzagate are true. And you have this, in my view, grotesque situation of gross hypocrisy, whereby anyone who questions that every last fact, or even the whole thing in its entirety, called Pizzagate, is to be questioned, is to be not accepted on face value. They are subjected to the most vile abuse and trolling as a result of having a different opinion to those that believe every last word and alleged fact. Now, I've been investigating and exposing the global paedophile ring of what you might call, not really, but it's what it's called, the elite of the world. And it is a global paedophile ring, not rings, in the end. The big one I'm talking about, the elite one. There are obviously aspects of it in different parts of the world, but in the end, it is part of one global ring. And there's reasons for this. There's reasons for the obsession with paedophilia and child abuse, which I go into in the books. And may do a videocast about it soon. But let's focus on Pizzagate and what's going on with that, and its place in the greater context of this paedophile ring and what has been happening to children decade after decade. The reason, let me say first of all, that this abuse ring, which is also connected into the satanic child sacrifice rings, indeed at the top or at the inner core, whichever analogy you want, the satanic sacrifice rings and the paedophile elite ring globally are actually aspects of the same thing. And the reason it's not come out is because both victims of it who've survived, many don't, and those who are seeking to expose it have been subjected to ridicule, abuse, dismissal, and all that goes with it. I mean, I'm a personification of that very response because of what abuse I've had over the years putting this information out. And it really is, like I say, hypocrisy and self-delusion on a mega shocking scale, that those who say they are trying to get information out about this paedophile ring in its various and indeed almost infinite forms should think that when people have another opinion from them or differ in certain facts and emphasis, that they should be subjected to abuse on the scale that we are seeing in relation to those questioning genuine people who do accept that there is a paedophile network, but have questioned aspects of Pizzagate, that they should be subjected to abuse, ridicule, and such extraordinary levels of hostility. Because what does that do? It silences people. And what does the abuse and ridicule and dismissal of those seeking to expose the paedophile networks, what does that do? It silences them. Now, if we are going to bring to the surface what is really happening to children worldwide on a staggering scale, then what we need first of all, and primarily, bottom line, is the free flow of information, the free flow of opinion, and the free flow of information. Now, we are not going to have that if all that happens when anyone questions even some details of someone else's view, i.e., let's talk about, in this case, Pizzagate, that they are going to be subjected to what they are being subjected to now. Because what that means is you're blocking the free flow of opinion and the free flow of information by intimidating people into silence, which is exactly how this whole paedophile network globally has been kept under wraps all this time. And you know, this may come as a shock to some of these abusers of those questioning Pizzagate. It's actually very good when people have a different opinion. It's actually very good when people challenge you and question you. You know why? Because it makes you question your certainty. It makes you question if every last fact that you claim to be fact is actually true. And what that means is if you have the humility to think that maybe we don't know it all, maybe not every assumption we've made is necessarily true, then you can look at those assumptions again. You can recheck the facts. You can recheck where this accepted piece of information, where did the original source come from? But no, people who question Pizzagate are in detail, not even necessarily in its entirety, they are subject to this extraordinary level of hostility. And what I would say to those people who are issuing forth the abuse, look at what you say about the suppression of information and the suppression of opinion by the mainstream media, and then find a frickin' mirror and ask yourself, well, am I actually behaving in the same way that I claim to oppose behaves? And the answer, if people are honest with themselves, over and over again will be yes, it is. So let us not forget either, of course, that trolls and abusers of people in the way that I talked about also connect in to a now massive and highly sophisticated military computerized system of systematic trolling and seeking to undermine those who are putting out information that people or those in the shadows don't want people to hear. But beyond that, we still have this very significant number of people who are not connected to the military, who act in the interests of the suppressors by abusing those who question anything they say. And I say that from the perspective of knowing for a long time, more than 20 years now, that these elite paedophile rings in the end ring exist, and that they connect into the child sacrificing satanic rings. Going back as far as 1998, I published this book, The Biggest Secret, which named people like the former Prime Minister of Britain, Edward Heath, as a paedophile and Satanist. And the passage in the book was read to him. He was still an MP, Member of Parliament at the time. Was read to him in the week of publication. What did he do? Nothing. Why? Because it was true. And it took nearly 20 years for a police investigation triggered by other sources, not mine, to start into the child abuse allegations against Edward Heath. Of course, now, as with all aspects of this child abuse, paedophilia revelation in Britain that came out after the revelations about the BBC entertainer and record-breaking paedophile Jimmy Savile, the investigation of Ted Heath is being attacked by aspects of the media, usual suspects, to try to kill that, as they did the same with killing investigations into Leon Britton, a Margaret Thatcher cabinet minister and Home Secretary, who I named in a later book, again, while he was still alive. And in The Biggest Secret, someone else I named in 1998 was a guy called Lord Alistair McAlpine. He was the Svengali spinner and closest of close associates throughout her period as Prime Minister of Margaret Thatcher. He was named to me by enough people for me to take it seriously and name him in the book during the 1990s. And of course, after the Savile revelations, there was this scandal in Britain when it was alleged that Lord McAlpine was a paedophile. And he then goes around threatening libel actions and instigating one or two over people actually in the end didn't name him directly. And he got massive payouts from the BBC and independent television, who neither of which named him. Go figure. And I named him in the 1990s in The Biggest Secret. And I named him again on the internet after the revelations became public all that time later. And he never even contacted me. And it's interesting that he was the spinner of and Svengali of Margaret Thatcher. The revelations about the Westminster paedophile ring were based upon the period of the Thatcher government. Margaret Thatcher was a very close friend of Jimmy Savile, and Jimmy Savile was an inner circle bosom buddy of the British royal family, brought into that circle in the 1960s by Lord Mountbatten, member of the royal family, who was a known paedophile. So when you look at my background, I've been at it with exposing this ring and uncovering it for decades. But that doesn't mean that you can't question every fact of every allegation and maybe think there's not enough to go on here to be so definite. Not that there's nothing happening, no. But be careful you don't make 2 and 2 equal 4,250, because if we do, it takes one massive exposure that allegations of a paedophile ring or a satanic ring is provable nonsense. And it discredits everything else. That's why everyone involved in this has a duty to the abused children to make sure that every fact is checked, and every assumption is based on credible information and credible sources. Against the background, in terms of Pizzagate, that without question, if you've stood next to me in the last 20 odd years, there is a massive elite paedophile network operating out of Washington, D.C. and out of the elite of the United States. And indeed, in the biggest secret, I expose Father George Bush as a notorious paedophile and abuser of children. If you go onto my YouTube channel, you'll see posted recently a video where I'm talking about Father George Bush and all that background. And the last time I looked, as I speak, closing in on 350,000 people have watched that in a matter of 3 days or so. And then there's another book, Transformation of America by Cathy O'Brien. This came out in 1995, and I met Cathy O'Brien and her partner very soon after the book came out. And I spent a lot of time with her talking about her experiences. I met her daughter, Kelly, who was born into captivity, literally, because Cathy O'Brien was one of an extraordinary number of young people who are taking into mind control projects which connect into the paedophile rings, connect into the satanic rings, and are turned literally into sex slaves who are used and abused by the elite, and then can't remember what happened until they're deprogrammed, like Cathy's been. What happened, thus keeping the elite people safe from exposure. It's called trauma-based mind control, creating multiple personality disorder, known now as dissociative identity disorder. I've talked about this and written about this at great length. And Kelly, Cathy's daughter, was born while Cathy was still in a government mind control project, a project known as Project Monarch, an elite part of a mind control operation in America that actually became public, called MK Ultra. And what Cathy describes in the book from her period in captivity, from a small child through into her 30s, was the unspeakable behavior of the Clinton family, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and the Bush family in the form of Father George Bush, and people like Dick Cheney, and a stream of other people in that same period of the Reagan, Bush and Bush administrations. Unspeakable is a word that doesn't even begin to cut it. Not just child abuse sexually, but torture. The sexual and abuse and torture of young women and others. And these, by the way, are the people that gave the order to invade countries and bomb countries. Anyone think that they will have any empathy with the people on the other end of the bombs? Whether it's in Syria or Libya or Iraq? When you have such a deleted empathy, a capacity for empathy, that you will do that to kids. So what goes on behind the scenes is so fantastic, so horrible, so horrific, that so many people, and you've got to understand that, and understand why, find it difficult, who've not done the research, who've not spoken to the people involved, and I've spoken to legions of them, in terms of the victims. They find it impossible to bridge that gap between the world as they think it is and the world in the shadows as it really is. And there was, of course, more confirmation of this in America with the revelations of a Nebraska state senator called John W. DeCamp, who wrote a book called The Franklin Cover-Up, which didn't set out to expose or uncover an elite paedophile ring connected to the Republican Party. It set out to investigate the corruption of something called the Franklin Credit Union in Nebraska, which was headed by a guy called Lawrence King, a big Republican who actually sang the national anthem at the Republican conventions in 1984 and 1988. And what DeCamp did, as he was uncovering the corruption for which Lawrence King was eventually jailed, he found that King was running an elite paedophile ring, supplying children to elite politicians in the Republican Party at conventions and what have you. Exactly the same theme and exactly the same story that you hear around the world in terms of political paedophiles in Britain and in Australia. I mean, does anyone really think that it's just a coincidence that people have come out in America, they've come out in Britain, they've come out in Australia and other countries talking about this, describing the same themes, the same abuse, the same elite networks, and it's all a coincidence and they're all just making it up? That's what the media want you to believe. And that's why I say to those investigating Pizzagate and passing on stuff about Pizzagate, just make sure that your assumptions are justified by the evidence and that things you take for granted as being true have been taken back to their original source to see if they are, and to see what that source is and is it credible. You know, what can happen is something gets on the internet and it's passed around, and suddenly where it actually originally came from is forgotten. It's taken for granted it's true, and it may be. What I'm saying is, take it back to where it came from, where it originated, every time, to see if that original source is credible, and credible enough to take it for granted that it must be true. Now, there are, without question, things that people should be questioning about this whole Pizzagate. This idea that there is a paedophile ring in Washington, D.C., there is, okay? It's not a question of is there a paedophile ring in Washington, D.C. My God, there is. And involves some of the most famous people in Washington. The question is all the detail about Pizzagate supportable? Because we've got to be careful that these things are not put out there to discredit everything else. That's why we've got to be really, really focused and disciplined about sources and making sure that 2 and 2 that we think equals 4 actually equals another number. But there are things about Pizzagate. This idea that there are codes, for instance, of pizza and hot dog and other things that connect to a paedophile coded language where these things appear to say one thing but are actually talking about children. Now again, we need to go back to where those codes came from to see if they come from a credible source and they can be taken as read. But when you read these emails that come out through WikiLeaks on which Pizzagate is based, emails involving people like John Podesta, who was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's election campaign, or non-election campaign, and his brother Tony Podesta, a lobbyist in Washington. Some of them certainly appear to be written in code. The question is, what is the code and why? And I think it's extraordinary. Well, it's not really when you know how it works. Why the mainstream media has not gone to these people and said, look, these emails where you're talking about pizzas and hot dogs, or others writing to you are talking about it. Why the obsession with pizzas and hot dogs? What does this actually mean? Can you just explain what this email was about, what was saying? And if they come out with a credible explanation, well, fair enough, thank you. But if they don't, well, what's this code? And, it's been said that the Podestas are creepy. And John Podesta, of course, not only has served Hillary Clinton's election campaign, but was chief of staff to Bill Clinton when he was president, and was a very close advisor to Barack Obama. So this is a big wig in Washington. And people have said that that the Podestas are creepy. Well, in my view, the Podestas are creepy. I mean, Tony Podesta seems to have a very strange taste in art. For instance, one of his favorite artists, he said, is someone, a Serbian artist, who paints pictures of semi-clad, semi-naked children looking very traumatized, and of children tied up, floating dead in swimming pools. I mean, hello? Creepy, are you kidding? And that kind of reminds me of Lord McAlpine, who had a art collection of an artist called Graham Ovenden, whose speciality was painting naked little children and semi-naked little children. A Graham Ovenden who eventually was jailed for paedophilia. What are these people? What are these people doing with art? alleged. Like that, and saying how good it is. The other thing is, of course, in this Pizzagate whole story and the allegations, is an artist who talks about something called spirit cooking, which involves, give some quotes from it, involves cooking, nice recipe. Mix fresh breast milk with fresh sperm milk, drink on earthquake nights. With a sharp knife cut deeply into the middle finger of your left hand, eat the pain. Fresh morning urine, she's taking the piss, sprinkle over nightmare dreams, etc. And she's a friend of Tony Podesta. And, you know, the people that are making the decisions that dictate our lives are not like most of the population is. And we need to kind of understand that. There is the world that the population lives in, and then there's the world that they live in, which is very different, to say the least. Then we have this connection to Jeffrey Epstein, the jailed paedophile, very rich man, who has been a close friend and associate of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's had something like 26 times that he's been on Epstein's plane, which is known as the Lolita Express because of its connection to paedophilia. Epstein is a friend of Hillary Clinton. He's a friend of, or certainly was, of people like Donald Trump, the president-elect, of Prince Andrew, and many others that would be called elite. And then you look in Britain, when we're putting together all these pieces of information, which, when you put them together, create a situation where these elite paedophile rings, or ring in the end, are actually in plain sight. But you need to take these apparently different pieces of information and situations and put them together, and then suddenly the pixels become a picture. So let's go to Jimmy Savile, if we must, the BBC, quote, entertainer, who after his death in 2011 was exposed as a record-breaking paedophile. What's not come out is that he was a procurer of children for the rich and famous, and that's why he managed to be a record-breaking paedophile decade after decade after decade, while being an inner circle bosom buddy of the British royal family and a close associate and friend of Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, without getting caught, charged, put away with the key thrown, mid-Atlantic. That's why he got away with it. And let's just analyse this and how these rings infiltrate every aspect of society. You cannot cough out of tune near the British royal family without the British intelligence network knowing about it. Just talk to people about the the background checks that go on for people that are going to have anything to do with the Queen or other members of the royal family, for instance. And yet, it's known that the police knew about Jimmy Savile's activities, paedophile activities, and he was into Satanism as well, because like I say, they're connected. I did nothing. So we're asked to believe that British intelligence, one of whom's jobs and special branch, basically the intelligence arm of the police, didn't know that this inner circle confidant of people like Prince Charles and the royal family, Prince Philip, that British intelligence did not know what Savile was up to decade after decade after decade, when the scale was stunning. Of course they bloody knew. Or we're being asked to believe that the FBI and the CIA didn't know what Father George Bush and Cheney and Clintons, and both Clintons, have been up to decade after decade after decade. Of course they knew. Of course they know. So why don't they do anything? Because the ring infiltrates all aspects of society, needed to do what they do and to cover up what they do. And it's so sad as well as sickening to see the way the media, particularly the usual suspects in the media, seek to trash and discredit any of these various aspects, whether it's in this country or that country, these various expressions of this paedophile ring being exposed, and thus being exposed with it, the true nature of those that run our world. At the moment in Britain, we have the papers full of allegations by former young footballers of being sexually abused by coaches. And the papers are full of it. They're outraged that this could have been done to young footballers by football coaches. And they're right to be outraged. It's appalling. But you see, exposing football coaches for the sexual abuse of young footballers is not going to bring the system down. It doesn't threaten the system at all. It might threaten the system of football. But don't threaten the system that dictates human society and the direction that it goes. But if the truth came out of the scale of child abuse, child torture, child sacrifice, Satanism, involving some of the most famous political leaders, politicians, and connected people, that came out, the system would fall. Because people en masse would see the force that's really controlling their lives, and how it has an obsession with children for reasons I explain in the books. There's a lot more background needed before that can be adequately explained. And so only in the last few days, we've had the police investigation into allegations about Edward Heath being trashed by the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail. Did I say usual suspects? We've had the investigations into the Thatcher cabinet minister Leon Britton being trashed by significant parts of the media. And of course, the government investigation, so-called inquiry, into the allegations of a Westminster paedophile ring, a la same as the Washington paedophile ring, being systematically trashed. The present Prime Minister of Britain, Theresa May, was Home Secretary when the pressure from the scale of revelations forced the government into announcing an inquiry into this political paedophilia in Britain and other things as well relating to child abuse. And one of the people at the centre of this was Leon Britton, in terms of appearing before the inquiry to answer questions, not least at how a dossier on elite child abuse given to him by a Conservative MP called Geoffrey Dickens suddenly disappeared and was not acted upon. And so Theresa May, either she's completely and utterly, fundamentally, shockingly idiotic and incompetent, or announces that the head of this inquiry is going to be someone called Baroness Butler-Sloss, who just happens to be the sister of one of the people, a guy called Lord Havers, Attorney General at the time that Leon Britton was Home Secretary, who was connected into this whole series of paedophile allegations and what happened to the dossier. So obviously, when this is exposed, Butler-Sloss has to stand down. Then she announces that someone called Fiona Woolf is going to take over. Okay? Fiona Woolf just happens to be a friend of Leon Britton's wife, has had dinner with Leon Britton, and lived in the same street. When that is revealed, she has to stand down. Then Theresa May goes to the other side of the world to a judge in New Zealand called Dame Lowell Goddard, who very quickly revealed and actually confirmed more since her resignation, to be absolutely not up to the job. So there's three gone. What's happened? Time is put between the revelations that were kind of, or the claims that were everywhere, and now just easing out the time, letting it go quiet, letting the public forget about it. And another thing is that with all these delays caused by what I've just described, these delays delayed the appearance of Leon Britton before the inquiry to answer questions. Leon Britton then died, it is said, of cancer after a long illness. After a long illness. So they knew, if you go with the official story, that Leon Britton had cancer and was dying of cancer. If you really wanted to find out about the background to what has gone on, what would you do? You get him in front of an official body as quickly as possible to get on the record his replies to these allegations and questions. No. Because of the delay, he died, and we'll never hear him answer for what he is said to have done, not least about the dossier. So when you, and I mean I could talk for hours, I won't, but I could. When you put all these things together, like I say, it's in plain sight. And if you look at Pizzagate in terms of its theme, rather than the fine detail of this pizza operation or this or that, if you look at it only in terms of theme, then of course, when you put the dots together, it's based on something that is actually happening on a staggering scale. But I would just say to those that are focusing on this and investigating this, and good luck to them, I say, just make sure that you don't get carried away to the point that you're making assumptions on detail that can be discredited, and thus, by association, discredit the whole idea that there's a paedophile ring at all. Go back to original sources. Check, recheck, check again. And if then it all adds up, then well done you. Because the more people that investigate this whole arena, the better. But it's got to be investigated in a professional way, and not just because something's been passed to you on Facebook to accept that it's true by definition. And I would say again, to those who issue forth this extraordinary, shocking level of abuse at those that are questioning some of the detail, even all of the assumptions of Pizzagate, you're just doing what that which you are opposing wants you to do by intimidating people into silence just because they have a different opinion to you. It's a society of free thought, free expression, free opinion that we're trying to build, isn't it? In the face of that which seeks to oppress and suppress all of that. And so we need to be at peace with people having a different opinion. Because if we're not at peace with that, we're not at peace with freedom. And in the end, if the free flow of information is allowed to prevail, the truth will, indeed must, come out. So whether every aspect, assumption and detail of Pizzagate is true or not true, it changes not one thing in relation to this. There is a global network of empathy deleted, psychopathic pedophiles and Satanists that are obsessed with children for reasons I can explain at length. And they are the people running our world. And thus, whether Pizzagate is true or not true, that remains true. And we need to face it and not allow our incredulity that they wouldn't do that to stop us realizing what's really happening and what's really happening to children now as I speak, all over the world, today and every day.